This episode is brought to you by Toad Ranch. Toad Ranch specializes in designing and building premium reptile habitats for everyone from dedicated hobbyists to zoos, nature centers, and other professional institutions. Known for their exceptional craftsmanship, fully customizable design, and unmatched attention to detail, Toad Ranch has become one of the most trusted names in reptile enclosures. Whether you're housing a single pet or an entire collection, Toad Ranch creates habitats that are built to last and designed with both keeper and animal in mind. And for listeners of the podcast, Toad Ranch is offering a special discount for a limited time. Use promo code SSP15 at checkout to receive 15% off all destination backgrounds and baskin hides. If you've been thinking of upgrading your enclosure, now is the perfect time to do it. That's SSP15 for 15% off destination backgrounds and baskin hides only at Toad Ranch. The air in the palm plantation never really cooled, even after sunset. The heat lingered beneath the broad leaves like a damp blanket, carrying the smell of wet soil, fermenting fruit, and stagnant water. Insects droned from every direction, their constant chorus rising and falling with the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a tokay gecko barked into the darkness. For most people, it was just another night in rural Sulawesi. But for Akbar, it was the end of an ordinary day. He had spent hours harvesting palm fruit beneath the towering trees whose canopies swallowed what little daylight remained. His machete hung at his side, stained with sap and dirt. His boots sank into the soft earth with every step as he made his way home through the plantation he had walked hundreds of times before. There was no sense of danger, no feeling that he was being watched. That's one of the most unsettling things about ambush predators. They don't announce themselves, they simply wait. Reticulated pythons are masters of patience. They spend days, sometimes weeks, conserving energy until opportunity passes within reach. Their camouflage disappears into shadows and fallen leaves so completely that even experienced wildlife biologists have walked past them without realizing they were there. The largest individuals are astonishing animals, more than 20 feet long, with muscles powerful enough to overpower deer, wild pigs, even small crocodilians. Humans are not normal prey. But nature does not recognize absolutes. As darkness settled over the plantation, the sounds of insects masked every subtle movement beneath the undergrowth. A body shifted, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to position itself. The snake had likely been lying motionless for hours, its tongue flicking occasionally to sample invisible chemical particles drifting through the humid air. Every step through the plantation carried vibrations through the ground, painting a picture that no human could sense. The strike itself would have lasted less than a second. Not a chase, not an attack from across the trail, an explosion of muscle from almost arm's length. Large constrictors do not crush bones as old myth suggests. Instead, they wrap up with astonishing speed, tightening each time their prey exhales. Blood pressure drops, circulation fails, consciousness disappears rapidly, often in well under a minute. The forest would have returned to silence almost immediately. The insects would have continued singing, the frogs would have kept calling. Nothing in the darkness would have hinted at what had just occurred. Hours later, villagers became concerned when Akbar failed to return home. The next morning, family members and neighbors searched the plantation. His harvesting tools were found, palm fruit laid scattered across the ground. One boot rested near disturbed vegetation. Nearby, they encountered something strange. A massive reticulated python lay stretched across the ground, its body swollen with an enormous bulge. The animal could barely move. No one there could have imagined what it contained. The snake was cut open. The search ended in a way almost too horrifying to comprehend. Inside was the missing farmer. The event stunned scientists and the world alike. Stories of giant snakes swallowing people had circulated for centuries across Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America, most dissolved into folklore or rumor. But this one was different. The recovery was documented by photographs and videos, making it the first fully confirmed case of a wild snake killing and consuming an adult human. Even today, incidents like this remained extraordinarily rare. Across millions of encounters between people and large snakes, almost all ends with the snake retreating into cover, avoiding conflict entirely. Yet somewhere in the humid forests and plantations of Indonesia, a giant reticulated python still waits in silence. Invisible beneath the leaves, motionless beside trails, perfectly adapted to disappear into the landscape. And perhaps the most unsettling truth of all is that if one is lying beside your path tonight, you will almost certainly never know it was there.
Welcome back to the Scoots and Scales podcast. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Luke, here joined by my co-host Channing. How's it going today?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm really excited for this episode because this is actually the first episode of our Scoots and Scales Legend series, which is going to be like our, we've talked about it last time, our kind of like true crime reptile podcast, which is personally what I'm most excited for. We've got a really exciting episode to kind of kick this off. We're going to talk about people being eaten by snakes.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, or maybe not.
Yeah, maybe or maybe not. We'll have to find out.
That we will. But regardless, we've got tons of large snakes that can be found through, several parts of the world there. And crazy stories of people getting eaten by snakes kind of tend to follow those regions. Namely, you get them in Southeast Asia, you get them in Central Africa, you get them around the Amazon in South America with a lot of our reticulated pythons, African rock pythons, green anacondas. Sometimes you get the occasional story from, as well as Southeast Asia, I guess, is in a similar region with your rock, Indian rock pythons and Burmese pythons. And those stories are now kind of spread with the snakes as an invasive species over to the US, where you hear a lot of news outlets talking about these Burmese pythons, telling people to be scared for their children's lives because of these invasive snakes that we have, unfortunately, in the Everglades now. So one thing we hope to do to talk about this issue in particular is to kind of separate the myth from the fact and really dive into these legends and see if there's any grains of truth to them there.
Which we'll talk about more, but I personally find these cases, specifically the ones in the United States, to be a bit ridiculous. And you look at like the people talking about the invasive snakes and your fear of those. I think it's silly. Now, not to say that the fear of snakes necessarily is silly, but the fear of being consumed by those large snakes, I personally consider to be kind of a silly fear, especially in the United States. Because I've been down to the Everglades. I've been looking for Burmese pythons to no luck. So I'm interested to see kind of what your stories are that you have and just kind of go from there, because I personally have no belief in these things happening inside the United States and think that it is not something that's going to happen. But what you got for me?
Well, to start off, there has, at this moment in time, never been a recorded case of a wild Burmese python killing and eating a person. Never in Southeast Asia, never in Florida, never anything like that, right? However, we do see that it's possible. Because first of all, how did Burmese pythons get to Florida? Did they swim? Did they book their own flight? No. They were brought here through captivity. And that's where you see some crazy things happening that maybe could warrant some of these concerns and fears. I remember personally, I don't remember how old I was at the time, but I remember watching I don't even remember which particular show it was, but it was a story that stood out in my memory watching Animal Planet several years ago, of a case of a pet Burmese python in Florida, unfortunately killing and eating a child.
See, I seem to remember this. I think I remember the story that you're talking about. I remember seeing this when I was younger, and kind of what mentally I've always chalked that up to was just being a story. I don't remember if I ever saw like whether it was true or not, and so my assumption was always that it wasn't true. So do you have any like news articles about this, backing up whether it's true or anything?
Mm-hmm. ABC News has some posts on it from August 24th, 2011. Florida Python owners Jaren Hare and her boyfriend Charles Darnell were each sentenced to 12 years in prison because of a snake that escaped from its cage and strangled a 2-year-old daughter.
Okay, so did it eat the child or did it just constrict the child?
It attempted to eat it, and they were able to pull it off before a child was eaten, but not before it was too late to save her life, unfortunately.
Okay, so not consumed, but still very sad story, because the child was the victim of what was apparently neglect by the parents and not securing their animal properly.
It was pretty rough. If you would like to hear some more of the news article here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Hare 21 and Darnell 34 were convicted it says last month because this was August, 2011, did I say? Yeah. Of third degree murder, manslaughter, and child neglect. The little girl, I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing this one, Shayana, I believe, was killed when the couple's pet Burmese python escaped from its enclosure, strangled the girl in her crib. The snake's tank was only equipped with, guess what?
I'm going to guess a rock on the lid.
No, I was very surprised to hear this. Equipped with a quilt for a lid.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
A medical examiner testified during the trial that the albino snake named Gypsy was underweight and trying to eat the girl. The snake hadn't been fed for a month when the girl died and was severely underweight at only 13 pounds. The Orlando Sentinel reported the snake would have weighed about 150 pounds. If it had been
Okay,
fed.
and how long did you say the snake was?
It did not give a length on here.
Okay, so it didn't give a length. Okay, so my first thought in this story is we've got some missing details, and also are coming from a news outlet who's well known, not necessarily this specific news outlet, but news outlets in general are well known to get stories incorrect about snakes. So from a skeptic side of things, I don't necessarily not believe that the event happened, but it seems like it's kind of a weird case, of how it particularly happened, saying that the snake hadn't eaten in a month and it was underweight. If you know anything about Burmese pythons, an adult Burmese python waiting a month to feed it is pretty standard. That's, you're not going to feed that thing any more than like every couple of weeks at the most if you're taking good care of it. So for that thing to be considered emaciated or severely underweight, I'd be a little skeptical. So what else you got?
Well, on top of that, just to kind of play off of your point there, again, working with Burmese pythons, I feel like anybody who's worked with them knows that they feel much heavier than they actually are. You pick them up and they feel massive. You put them on a scale and it's pretty humbling, right? So I could absolutely see that as being a case of, asking them, how much does the snake weigh? Oh, it feels like it's about 150 pounds.
Yeah.
If it's a 14, 15 foot Burmese python, it probably does feel like that. But then putting it on the scale, 13 pounds does still sound a little underweight to me, but a lot closer to the correct weight for a large Burmese python than 150 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, I would think 13 pounds, if it's an underweight Burmese python, that to me sounds like an 8-foot snake. That's like, in my mind, that's what it put at. And I know the general rule of thumb is like, it takes an 8-foot Burmese python to be able to be, possible to kill, or an 8-foot constrictor to be able to be possible to kill a human being. But it's basically at that point you allowing them to do it. Now I know obviously that goes way down for an infant and for a small child, so that story could make a little bit more sense. So we could see it definitely, if it was 13 pounds and it was underweight, then this snake definitely would have been big enough to potentially strangle a child. So that does add some validity potentially to the story. But do you have any other cases of this happening in North America, or is that the only cases of a confirmed
That's
kill?
The only one I was able to find from a reliable news outlet there.
Okay. And even then reliable is a little...
With the Burmese python anyway.
Okay. What else you got?
I might save another story for another region there. But yeah, again, kind of circling back to some of the fears and concerns people have. Do we need to be looking out for our kids out there in the backyard? I would say if it's able to unfortunately claim a victim in captivity, it could probably claim a victim in the wild as well, especially if it's a small child running around unattended, to which case my advice to you would be maybe just don't let your 2-year-olds run around the woods by themselves, but to each their own on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would almost do a counterpoint, be like, it's the only case we've had. Mm-hmm. Or at least the only case from a reliable, that you're able to find from a somewhat reliable news source. No. And even then, it was special circumstances in captivity. Mm-hmm. The likelihood, I feel like, of this happening in the wild, it hasn't happened.
Slim to none there. I mean, cross-reference that with other animals that kill people in the wild in South Florida. Everything down from wild dogs to alligators to traffic.
I mean, I think ultimately the thing that you run into is the challenge, and what does end up causing these fatalities down there is unattended children. And it's when they're not watched, they're by themselves when they shouldn't be. And so it does go back to neglect on the side of the parents rather than being the fault of the animal, right? In a lot of these cases. It's a very sad story no matter what, not to just say like, oh, excuse it away. But it is one of those things that if you're paying attention to your child, a Burmese python's not going to kill your child.
Yeah.
And even if you're near one, it's probably not going to do anything to your child.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. The next region I want to talk about kind of adds to your point there, validifies it a little bit. And I feel like North America is kind of I don't want to say the word silliest, but the least likely for something like this to happen. Right?
Yeah, I would agree.
At least out of the regions.
Maybe Canada.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say at least out of the regions that, large pythons are found in these days, or large snakes, which is why I kind of want to move a little further south to South America, where we hear stories all the time about anacondas snatching people in the river and
movies even
them to the depths. Oh my goodness, the movies.
They're
pretty
movies.
They're pretty entertaining.
If I had
movies.
A nickel for every time they made a movie about anacondas trying to eat people, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Or it might make sense that it happened twice. They're pretty entertaining, but they are pretty bad.
All right, bad. Tell me some of these stories.
Well, the first story is one that I actually got first count hearing of, which was when I was volunteering with the Southeastern Reptile Rescue there in Central Georgia.
Got a Luke exclusive.
Right? I remember holding a yellow anaconda out in front of guests for them to be able to view it. And there was this woman who came up. I believe, I could be wrong, I believe she said that she was from Venezuela. And the reason that's kind of important is she was like, oh, she was super interested. What kind of snake is this? It's so pretty. I was like, this is a yellow anaconda. And she immediately wanted nothing else to do with it, nothing else to do with me. And I was like, no, it's a really awesome snake. You can take a closer look at it. And she goes, no. I used to live in Venezuela. There was a child swimming in the river. We were all down washing clothes, bathing in it. And an anaconda pulled him under and killed him. And I watched it happen. And I was like, I started off being like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That, sounds extremely traumatic. I'm so sorry you had to witness that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was really curious. So I was like, how big roughly do you think the snake was? And she said, well, I never actually saw the snake.
Okay.
I said, really? She's, what exactly happened, if you don't mind walking me through that? And she said, well, he kind of swam a little too far away from his parents and an anaconda drug him under. He just got snatched under the water like that. And he never came up again. And so I was like, that is horrible. But, when an anaconda like this grabs something, it's going to grab it, wrap it up, and squeeze it. Where they're usually going to float on top of the water, especially if there's something trying to swim while that's happening, right? I was like, not to discount your story, but this sounds much more like the work of a large fish. We've all seen river monsters at some point or another, right? Or perhaps a caiman. And she said, yeah.
The Orinoco crocodile, which I just double checked, but they do live in that area. So Venezuela does have Orinoco's and they get big.
They do that. And I just said do. But you know what? Yeah, I was like, it sounds maybe more like one of these is potentially what got it. The anacondas, there's never been a recorded case of them, taking a human. And she said, no, you weren't there. It was an anaconda. I know what I saw and walked away.
Fascinating. So the most reliable news source we have possible is Trust Me, Bro.
No, I've got another one. If you've ever heard of Sage Journals, I just got it.
Okay.
This one is not pertaining to a green anaconda or to a yellow anaconda. I just gave it away there. It's, the larger cousin, the green anaconda. They're among the largest of living snakes, as it goes on to say. There are 4 species of them through South America. We describe a predatory attack by a green anaconda on, you'll never guess what.
Never guess. What is it?
A 2-year-old.
Oh, okay.
So we're starting to see a trend here.
Yep,
in Midwestern Brazil, while bathing in the morning with his family, father and mother, in a stream close to his home in the rural area in the municipality of, I'm going to butcher this one, Vicentinopolis ish is roughly what it's called.
Vincentinopolis.
There you go. A state of, I'm not even going to try that one to go. Goiás, Brazil. The child was attacked by an adult anaconda with a total length estimated of 4 meters. Similar to the Burmese python story, The predation event was unsuccessful on the anaconda's part, but thankfully this one has a bit of a brighter ending than our last story. The snake bit the left arm and entwined the boy's body. The parents failed to force the child to release, or forced blah blah blah. For
Failed to force.
Failed to force the snake to release the child from its coils, and even after being hit repeatedly with a stick, the snake continued to constrict the child. I would say that sounds very likely. If anybody here has worked with anacondas and had one have a feeding response toward you in captivity, I don't even think you could beat a baby with a stick and get it to let go. they're pretty determined. And even after being hit repeatedly with a stick, the snake continued to constrict the child. A nearby military patrol heard the family's screams and responded to it. Upon reaching the scene, also failed to manually force the snake to release its coils. The child was freed when the snake was killed by repeated blows with a machete. The child was subsequently examined at the nearest emergency room and did not present any fractures or injuries to internal organs. The snake's attachments, front bite, or in this attachment points, which is, the bite, showed teeth marks, which are superficial wounds. Attacks by anacondas are rare and most commonly are defensive in nature. Now, there are some pictures with this one that do show the creek that he was in, that show a blurry picture of the anaconda with the head blurred off that's been removed, and the boy's arm, which does show what looks like a large snake bite on a child's arm here, which I can attempt to show these on the webcam.
No, I don't think it's worth it.
I don't think it's worth it.
So it sounds to me, just kind of hearing the story, this one I would say out of the three we've had so far is the one I would be most likely to believe as actually happening. Because, I mean, it sounds feasible. And the little boy survived. It definitely seems possible. And it makes sense. It could be a misunderstanding of he bit the arm, they're playing in the river, he thinks it's a fish, something like that, wraps around, but ends up surviving just fine. This story seems to make sense. So it's an attempted predation event, which likely was due to a misidentification.
Absolutely.
So it's not an attempt to eat a human necessarily.
Not necessarily, at least not, an adult human, because those cases are pretty rare. That was, again, the only one I was able to find this week, scouring the internet for, or at least only reliable sounding one. That said, if you type in anaconda eats human in the Amazon, 99% of what you're going to hear are stories of fishermen going missing that were pulled from their boats by anacondas, that somebody else saw them fall in and never come back out, and they say, oh, an anaconda got them. Well, as we kind of discussed earlier, that's not really how large snakes work. They don't really drown. They don't really drag things to the bottom of the river and hold on to them there.
So, I mean, the stories, they seem to have kind of the common descriptor in this is typically people are by themselves. And usually with those stories, it's a secondhand witness seeing something happen and assuming that it's an anaconda. And that makes sense. I think that's pretty consistent, because what you end up having is you have the fear, because it's known that a snake that does get big enough exists in those areas. And so when the fear is present, it's going to naturally create the imagination, reaction. You see this person go missing in an area where anacondas are known to exist, and you're going to think automatically, oh, someone got snatched out of a boat, chalking it to an anaconda. And when there's no evidence whatsoever, it's easy to be like, yeah, anaconda got him. Simple as that. And just kind of pin it on those things. So that would be kind of where my brain would go listening to these, especially when you consider that there's zero proven documented cases of anacondas eating a person. It's never been proven.
I don't know that I was able to find one of an anaconda killing a person, much less eating one.
And I mean, you think about anacondas being one of the most widely feared snakes in the world because of their size, and it's also a name that everybody knows, whether it be because of the movies or any of those things. The word anaconda is one that the majority of people are going to understand, and they're going to know what that animal is. So it's easy to take something like that and have that be blamed, especially when all the people in those areas are going to know about that animal's existence. They've probably seen a big one if they live down there. So it'd be easy for them to imagine, oh, if I've seen this one this size, which big ones have I not seen? Things like that. So that'd be what I'd kind of chalk these stories up to.
I mean, and those stories just get crazier when you talk about big ones there. I mean, how often do you see reports online of 60-foot anaconda spotted in the Amazon?
Yeah.
All the
Absolutely.
time. Could a 60-foot anaconda eat somebody? Oh, 100% without any effort.
Could a 60-foot anaconda exist? No.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. But at the same time, to kind of play devil's advocate for it, could even an 18-foot anaconda kill somebody? Absolutely. And if they were out there by themselves, who's to know? There's all kinds of animals in the Amazon that are gonna make good use of that protein, so to speak, even if the snake is unable to kind of finish the predation event there. Especially the many parts of the Amazon being widely unreached or very rarely reached, very difficult to get. So there's not a lot of technology. Not everybody has a cell phone like we do here to say, oh, look at this that I took a picture of. So I will say a little bit of a spoiler alert there, that out of our kind of speculation section, the anaconda is the one that if I was a betting man, I would have to put my money on, saying maybe they've gotten somebody and we just don't know it. I don't think they have, but they're the one that I'd be the most willing to give the benefit of the doubt to.
Definitely. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I did hear a story of an anaconda successfully consuming a person. But the thing is, like, these stories are probably be happening in areas where you're not going to have news outlets. You're not going to have like really good documentation, and they're probably going to happen to someone who, not to say they wouldn't be missed, that's not by any means what I'm saying, but someone who exists in an area so detached from the rest of the world that's not really going to circulate incredibly well. When you're down in like the far reaches of the range of the anacondas, where you're most likely to have one of these giant snakes. The more exploration you have, the more people you have around, the less likely you are to have one of those giant snakes existing in that area. Mm-hmm. And so I think possible, yes, but I wouldn't necessarily chalk it up to super likely. So I think this is a good spot to kind of propose this. My thing that I would propose to you as a listener, if you're listening to this segment right now, is, do you believe in the Western Hemisphere, specifically in the populated Western Hemisphere, you need to be afraid or worried at all about a snake eating you? Luke, do you want to answer the question?
I personally wouldn't be. I mean, I just said that anaconda is the one I would be willing to give the most benefit of the doubt to. And we do not have anacondas as an invasive species in South Florida or anywhere in the United States.
Yeah, at least not documented in high numbers. The few that have been found aren't even confirmed, at least I don't think, down in Florida. So there's speculation of them even being down there in the first place. So not really something you have to worry about, I wouldn't say.
So, and like I said, in regards to potentially worrying about a child being around a Burmese python, I would be a lot more worried about a lot more things in Florida than the python. You've got the occasional panther coming through. That's
I mean, I wouldn't be worried about a Florida panther at all.
Well, I mean,
you'd be lucky to get attacked by a Florida panther. There's so few numbers.
In regards of a child being left alone and something happening.
Oh yeah, I gotcha.
A bear, a panther, an alligator, or the Florida man is the one I'd be
Florida
the most
man is the one
about.
I'd be the most afraid of. Yeah, some just dude in the swamp. I feel like that's your biggest threat for sure.
I'd be far more willing to trust a large Burmese python than the Florida man.
Yeah. No offense. If you live in Florida, we're not talking about you. You know the specific group of people we're talking about. The real crazy Floridian who lives out in the swamp. That kind of deal we're talking about. Not you. But
I think that kind of wraps up what I had to say about, for the most part, about North and South America. Though I would like to move over to the Old World to discuss the kind of the strangest region. You hear stories about people going missing and saying a large snake must have grabbed them, which would be around the Congo River. And people blaming the African rock python. We've all heard of this crazy. Again, I don't know why it's always the 60-foot snake, but the 60-foot snake that was supposedly recorded by a helicopter.
The Congo snake? You mean the 100-foot long snake?
The 100-foot long Congo snake is another crazy story of a large snake, right? And that's neither here nor there whether you believe in that one.
We may even talk about that at some point.
We may even talk about that on some point, but maybe partially due to things like the large Congo snake, you hear stories, whether they be made up or people actually believe them, and they're just most likely incorrect, about large snakes killing and eating people in Africa. Could it happen? Well, I think we need to circle back up to North America to talk about it a little bit, but this time go a little bit further north from Florida, which, little known fact, the Burmese pythons get all the kind of the spotlight in the news as Florida's top invasive species, but in some areas further south, you do get small populations of the African rock python invasive in Florida as well. So we got a little 2-for-1 here. And the main one I want to talk about this is a snake named Tiny.
Okay.
Tiny was I just had it pulled up, 8 foot or roughly 2.4 meter pet African rock python.
Okay.
Now, Tiny was owned by a gentleman named Daniel Brandon, who died at 31 from asphyxiation at his home near Bassington, Hampshire on the 25th of August. What year was this? This was posted on the 24th of January 2018, so slightly more recent.
Somewhat more recent, yeah.
So one of his pets, a female African rock python named Tiny, was found near his body out of its pen. The coroner, Andrew Bradley, said there was no doubt Mr. Brandon died as a result of contact with Tiny, and he recorded a verdict of misadventure. Mr. Brandon had kept snakes for 16 years. Tiny was only one of 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas he kept in his room at his family home.
What a lunatic.
The tarantulas, that's what gets a lot of people there. North Hampshire coroner's court heard. His mother, Barbara Brandon, said her son had owned Tiny since it was small enough to fit in his hand. He never felt threatened by Tiny and was aware of how strong it was, she said. But there were occasions where it would strike out if she entered the room. I think that's kind of silly.
Yeah.
The other thing
the snake hates the mom.
The other thing I think is kind of impressive, is that Tiny was definitely an African rock python. I don't know about you. I've never had experience with African rock pythons, but I've never heard anybody who had experience with African rock pythons say they're great. They're such sweet snakes. I love handling them.
Yeah. I've heard it's possible.
Absolutely.
But,
it seems like it's possible here. But after all, you say he never felt threatened. She told the court on the night of her son's death she heard a bang coming from his room, but had assumed it was a dumbbell falling or that he had knocked something over. She later discovered Mr. Brandon unconscious in his bedroom and later found the snake coiled under a cabinet. Pythons kill. Okay, this just talks about that. Mr. Bradley said the most likely scenario that Tiny was engaged with Dan. I have no doubt about that. She was coiling around him, at which point I have no idea. There was a point at which either she takes hold of him unexpectedly or trips him up or some other mechanism. Mr. Bradley said the snake then hid, probably because of the shock of him falling or because of his reaction. However, reptile expert Professor John Cooper, who examined Tiny at the Brandon's home in November, told the court Mr. Brandon would have known how to unwrap a python. That said, I'm not sure how, if our man Daniel Brandon was hitting the gym how often here. I know I'm a skinny guy.
They don't give you dimensions on Daniel, just the snake.
We have around an 8-foot python, an 8-foot Burmese python at the Wildlife Center. We also have one that's a little over 9 foot. I know if it was a situation where they were able to get around my neck and began squeezing very tightly, I would not be able to pull them off by myself.
Yeah. Whereas I may fare a little bit better given my size. A little bit.
So that's neither here nor there. What I think is very interesting in this is nowhere, and makes it kind of an interesting case. The main reason I wanted to bring it up is just, could an African rock python be lethal to an adult human? And it seems yes. What I think is interesting about this case, though, and maybe they were there and it didn't feel the need to specify on BBC here. However, it never says anything about any kind of bite marks, never, whether it be on the head or the arms or anything, where maybe a predation event happened. What it seems to me, again, kind of working with large snakes could have happened was, one, maybe he had it around his neck while he was playing video games on his computer, reading a book, who knows? And either that snake got, being an ectothermic animal, very cozy around that neck, for lack of better words, and began squeezing very tightly to kind of get some of that heat, and just accidentally killed its owner. The other one, which I think is a very similar explanation to it, is maybe he was holding it, walking around, and the snake slipped and fell off of its shoulder, at which case it wrapped very quickly, very tightly around the neck like a tree branch in order to not fall down and smack the floor. In which case, yeah, I don't know how you would get a over 8 foot snake off of your neck either.
Yeah.
So
which, I mean, like, I've been in a situation similar with 7.5, 8 foot long red-tailed boas, where they felt slightly uncomfortable and they've wrapped really tightly around like my arm, not as a predation method, not out of anything aggressive or anything like that, but just trying to hang on. And in those moments, like, you can feel the loss of circulation. You can, in your arm, in that area, you can feel your fingertips start to get tingly, things like that. It's not a scary event necessarily because the animal's not trying to hurt you, but it is impressive, their ability to hang on when they're not trying to harm you. Like, they're trying to just hang on to you and not fall down. That's something they would naturally do in a tree branch or around something like that. So I definitely think what you're saying is possible, even if highly unlikely. It is possible to have happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last one here being from the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, this is the one you're saying is possible. Those were all, confirmed accounts on I'd say on news outlets where those people are now unfortunately no longer with us and their bodies were examined. I say all those, the child in South Florida, as well as this man. Thankfully, the child was able to go on living after surviving a green anaconda down there in South America. This is the one where there's a little bit of room for speculation here.
Okay.
This one is supposedly, we don't really know, but we're pretty sure, a predation event of an African rock python with a child in Africa, as the name implies there. It goes on to say from, what did I say? The Sydney Morning Herald, a 6-meter African rock python swallowed a 10-year-old boy near Durban, the first recorded man-eating incident for its species. For 3 hours, other children hid up mango trees near the township of Lambtonville, too terrified to flee, as the snake first trapped the young boy and squeezed. I'm not going to word it that way. And, I mean, not that it's incorrect, but was a little graphic there, and subdued the boy, shall we say, before consuming him whole. Police and snake experts found no trace of the child or his clothing except for the flattened grass and a trail leading down to a nearby stream. The incident it says last week, I guess I should start off with when this was posted, November 25th, 2002. Police and snake experts found no trace of the child or his clothing except for flattened grass and trail leading down to a nearby stream. I will say this is another one, upon looking into it, it might have been one of I believe it was maybe the Extreme show. This was another story that Animal Planet covered on one of their crazy mid-2000 shows there. The incident prompted widespread panic among the township, 50,000 residents, and great fascination among herpetologists across the country. Kaye, oh my goodness, I I was not prepared. We're just going to acknowledge that I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but I'm going to do the best that I can. Kaye Buthelezi, 11, who witnessed the extraordinary attack, was persuaded to revisit the site on Saturday, his eyes darting nervously for signs of the python. Kaye led the way to where his young companions had been gathering fallen fruit when he was seized by the giant snake. The snake quickly wrapped itself around his body, pinning his arms to the side. He didn't cry or scream, and neither did the rest of us. We didn't want the snake to come and take us as well. The snake squeezed tighter and tighter around him until his eyes closed and his head fell back. So I thought he was dead or had fainted. The snake's mouth opened very wide and started to swallow him from the head down, his clothes and everything. It all took about 3 hours because it was dark when we saw it slither away and we finally came down from the tree. Craig Smith, the owner of a snake park in Durban, is one of those trying to find the python. He said the snake had probably just woken from its winter hibernation, or as we know, brumation, and was extremely hungry when the boy wandered into its path. We have never heard of a case of African rock python eating a human, but they are very opportunistic eaters, and the snake was obviously hungry enough to think it could cope with a child, he said. The people of the township are organizing snake hunts each day, although they have been told that if they find the python, they should not kill it but call the experts instead. African rock pythons are protected species in South Africa, where they are coveted for multi-traditional healing and their skin. African rock python, okay, that's just a little thing about them. That's basically the story there. The reason I think there's a lot of room for speculation, and where, I mean, we know that this child went missing. I don't think he's been found to this day. The reason I think it's a little here nor there is, one, this has never happened before, never happened after. Not to say that there isn't a first time for everything, but two, in the cases that you're going to get into after this, they were always able to find the snake. This one, for just, oh, giant snake to disappear into the stream. Not to say that it couldn't happen, but especially with a large meal like that, it's not going very fast.
Yeah, I think especially like you're saying, when you look at the stories we'll get into in a moment and kind of distance them or find like the similarities between those and this animal disappeared. This animal would not have been ridiculously large. This is a species that when they consume meals, they like to sit in the same spot or very close by while they digest that meal. And so kind of all those things point towards the kid disappeared, probably not a snake in my opinion, and definitely not confirmed as him being consumed by the snake for reasons we'll get into in a moment. But do you have anything else about this case in particular?
That was mostly it. Another thing I wanted to mention too is, of course, the children being I say children there. Another reason I think it's a little hard to accept is too, it says that there were multiple children who witnessed the event, and only one of them, the 11-year-old boy, was willing to talk about it, which, you know, I probably wouldn't want to talk about it either. Back then, that sounds horrific. Two, the way he describes it. He talks about the eyes closing before blacking out there. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've never watched anyone be constricted by a snake, but, you know, I've kept snakes, and some of them do want to start off with live feeders before going to frozen thawed rodents. I don't know how similar nervous systems are there, but I've never watched a snake, or anything for that matter, kill another animal and then have the eyes shut.
Yeah.
That's an odd little detail to throw
constriction, in there. Like one of those things, once again, I'm not an expert on this, so I wouldn't be able to answer for sure, but my thought would be, without being too graphic, that pressure would not cause you to close your eyes. I'll put it like that.
No, yeah. And on top of that, I mean, it was an 11-year-old boy. There are many reasons we do not use 11-year-old children as cases, or as witnesses in murder cases, where they directly watched a murder take place. You know, you got to do a little bit more digging before you can convict a person, even if they say, I saw this man did it. Well, sometimes
it's hard to take a child's testimony as perfect.
It is, and to no fault of their own. They're right. They're in shock. It's a horrible thing. That is mostly all that I have to say to it. So, I mean, of course, it's a horrible thing that child is missing. And not to say that it definitely wasn't a snake as well, but it's one of those that I think is very unlikely. It's also, I feel like, important, even though it was covered by, that was personally my favorite one I was able to find, but multiple news outlets, Animal Planet even covered it.
Which everything Animal Planet's ever covered is true, right?
Especially in
the mermaids.
Let's not get started on the lost tapes there.
Oh yeah, there's some good stuff on Animal Planet.
There is, yeah. But I was going somewhere with that. Yeah, you'll see a lot of cases like this, not just with snakes, but with, I mean, it doesn't even have to be, you know, bad things like this, right? You'll see lots of cases where, you know, lots of Guinness World Records with things and all that. It does not, whether this actually happened or not, this is not a recorded case of it happening. They did not find the snake. They did not find the child. So jury's still out there. You know, there's still only one snake that we know of that does maybe sometimes predate on people.
So I think that's a good thing to get into now. Is we talk about that story that just took place. We talk about it in 2002, and the reason why I say it is definitely not confirmed is because the very first confirmed 100% did happen case was our intro. The intro we had with Akbar Salubiro, a 25-year-old farmer. This took place in Sulawesi palm oil farm, and this was the first confirmed case ever. There's not to say not first story we've heard, not first story with evidence, whatever. The first fully confirmed and documented case of a snake eating a man, and it was done by a reticulated python. It is in March of 2017. So that's our first story that we have for sure happening. And you can kind of go back with the intro, and the details of it are basically him walking by himself in the palm plantation, a place where he had worked, a place that he knew very well, but he was by himself. It was nighttime. He's in an area where you've got this clearing of forest in order to have the palm oil, which is a very large crop down there. And when they've cleared that forest out, you're getting biological pressure, or ecological pressure, I should say, and that's forcing humans closer into interaction with these snakes. These snakes have less of an area to retreat. They don't want anything to do with people, but the encounter happens. Also, you end up with one of those cases of a snake existing in that area, a very large reticulated python existing in that area, someone walking by at the right time, and that's how we end up with the story of Akbar Salibiro, who was confirmed to have been killed because they found the snake with him still inside of it, and then were able to get him out of it and identify that as him. Now, I don't know if it's an odd thing necessarily, but what I find interesting is that there's no confirmed cases of this ever until 2017. And then June 2018, we have it happen again. We have Watiba, who is a 54-year-old, I believe that's 54-year-old woman on Muna Island. She disappeared from her local garden patch, and her body was recovered intact in front of local authorities. So she was also consumed by a reticulated python. She was in her garden patch by herself working on that. And then we skip a couple of years, thankfully, to 2022. And then we have Jara, who is 54 again, a Sumatra rubber plantation worker, intercepted while working entirely alone. I believe in the cases of that one, that was another story that was a nighttime event where those people were by themselves at night and got eaten by a reticulated python. And then we have case number 4, which took place in June of 2024, so just 2 years ago. And that was someone by the name of Farida, who was 45, and that was in South Sulawesi, a bulge discovered by her husband, and search parties in a thick forest corridor. So they discovered that that she was consumed by this reticulated python. So the things that you kind of look at with these stories are the what runs in common with those. So with any of those stories, were they in a group? No.
No, they were not.
They were all by themselves. And also, this takes place in the area of the world with the largest snake, the reticulated python, a very, very large snake, and also a very fast predator. When they're giant, they're not going to be as fast, but still a very large and fairly quick moving constrictor that also is not absurdly rare to get that big in those areas. And you've got the ecological pressure on these animals from the development and the removal of their natural habitat. So what you kind of end up with is a perfect mixing of scenarios. And I think it's as this development has crept up and has encroached on their habitat, you're getting that pressure increasing. I think that can be kind of what's causing these stories to start happening. We didn't have documentation of these stories happening prior to 2017, despite cameras and all that stuff existing long before them. It would have been easy to document in the years following that, but it's since that habitat destruction has increased in years. I think these encounters are only going to become more likely to happen in those areas. Not necessarily people being eaten, but encounters with those large pythons do become more frequent. But ultimately, that's one part of the world. It's one species of snake and one fairly small part of the world. Not exactly something that's super likely to happen to you and I, which is the point of this. We do have confirmed cases of it, and there are reticulated pythons here in the United States, not wild reticulated pythons, but they are a snake that's in the hobby, a snake that is available for purchase, in my opinion, way too easily and way too readily available for how much of a responsibility they are. Not because of the danger, because I don't personally believe in being necessarily dangerous snakes as long as you know what you're doing, but they're a very large animal that demands a lot of responsibility and to care for.
I would like to jump in right there and, kind of talk about a consequence if you're not responsibly caring for and handling these animals. Is, of course, not only do we have the Burmese pythons as an invasive species in South Florida, but something that I am shocked does not get more news coverage, especially with the stories in recent times that we've talked, or I say the stories, the confirmed accounts that we just talked about there recently in Southeast Asia, is we technically do have reticulated pythons as an invasive species in the United States, not in our continental United States, but down in our, one of our territories down in Puerto Rico. You have invasive, large Burmese pythons out there. And so that is something that I feel like is there's a lot of invasive species on Puerto Rico. I even got to go and kind of kept an eye out for reticulated pythons. I started doing some herping, looked into some videos on people finding them there, talked to people, and everybody said the same thing, which was the best place to find large Burmese pythons in Puerto Rico is to walk out into the jungle and look for abandoned houses and go look in the abandoned houses, and that's where they like to hide. And I was like, I am not doing that.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So I did not see any invasive snakes. I did see mongooses, though. Mongooses, whatever you want to call them. The small mongai, the small mammals from India. And what's kind of crazy is one reason why reticulated pythons do well on Puerto Rico is there are no, kind of like our Burmese pythons in Florida, but even more so, there's nothing that's going to eat them down there. Even a small snake. I think the largest snake on Puerto Rico is the Puerto Rican boa, maybe gets like 5 or 6 foot at the most, other than the reticulated python now. And what's kind of crazy, the reason I wanted to bring up the mongoose is they will actually eat a small reticulated python, and they're like the only thing out there that does it. And I did get to see a couple of those, so that was kind of sad to see them in an environment not their own, but also kind of cool to see a little mammal from India not in India. But yeah, I did just want to, while you were talking about Burmese pythons in captivity and the importance of keeping them responsibly, I did kind of want to cut
reticulated
you off there.
Pythons.
What did I say?
You've been saying Burmese python for like the past 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So backtrack everything you just heard. Yeah, reticulated pythons. So, but yeah, I forgot about those guys being invasive down there. So yeah, if you're not taking care of the animals responsibly, you can end up with those things which are environmentally detrimental by having those invasive species in those areas. But the thing ultimately to go back on is we don't really need to worry about it. But I do think it's fun to kind of play devil's advocate here and kind of paint a picture of what if we were going to make a snake eat a person in a story-wise, how would we make the scenario work? So Luke, if you want to try, do you want to try and paint a picture for us of like, how could you logically support snakes as man-eaters?
Well, even the reticulated pythons being the longest snakes in the world that we know of, it's still going to take an exceptionally large individual to take down a person. The only person they're really, I say to take down, to be able to consume a person. The only person that they're going to be able to consume is going to unfortunately be a below average size person there. We see that in the case of the green anaconda attempting to go after the 2-year-old in the Amazon. We see that in the case of the Burmese python that did unfortunately claim the life of a 2-year-old in captivity in South Florida. And it's kind of, it's going to be a weird way to word that, but the average, let's say, height for a human being in Southeast Asia, particularly around Thailand and many of the places.
And Sulawesi and all that.
Is going to be a lower average height.
Yeah.
Than many other surrounding
And
areas.
not to mention, like,
So,
those are farmers and people who are working outside and probably eating a lot more vegetables than we do here in the United
mm-hmm.
States. So even if they're very physically fit, they're probably going to be a little bit more trim than we are in the United States as a country that likes to eat a little bit of fattening food. Pretty, you know, I mean,
Absolutely. I
like
mean,
we're a pretty comfortable country, you know. So I
I
think
mean,
they're more likely to have the average person be more edible to a
and
large snake like that.
to kind of add to that, what is, if a snake is going to attempt a person, what is the thing they're going to struggle with eating the most? It's
Getting
going to
past the
be
shoulders.
getting past the
Yeah.
shoulders there. I can't speak much to this, but before we hopped on, I was doing some Google searches on snakes being, being able to use that quadrate bone and how different snakes are able to manipulate their jaws. I know, for example, my Japanese rat snakes over here, they can open their jaws and eat something much larger proportionately than my indigo snakes can. They just cannot open, they don't get nearly as much width with those jaws as something like a king snake or a rat snake does, right? So that's what kind of sparked that interest. And again, it was just a little Google AI overview I was pulling my answers from. But the general consensus was that you take a reticulated python and a Burmese python, green anaconda, African rock python of equal lengths. And on average, the reticulated python can open their jaws about 30 degrees wider. Most of them kind of hit that 150-degree mark, whereas the reticulated
Yeah.
python, it claimed, could reach the 180-degree and sometimes larger. So it just seems they have better jaws equipped for taking down larger prey than some of the other large pythons and anacondas.
For sure. So, I mean, I think we've got kind of our picture is if you wanted to be eaten by a snake, which we don't recommend, kind of the circumstance you would need to be looking for is being by yourself in an environment where there are incredibly large constrictors natively, particularly the biggest species to exist. So the only place where they're going to really exist and be big enough is probably going to be around Sulawesi in that area. So you'd have to be in that area. You'd have to be in one of these areas that has been deforested a little bit and replanted with the palm oil, and where you have that ecological pressure. You need to be there at night because all these cases, at least from what I found, happened at night. And you would need to be a below average in size, relatively thin person, and you would have to be lucky enough to stumble across that giant reticulated python in such a manner to where it is hungry enough and prepared to consume you.
Mm-hmm. And that's one reason why I feel like it's so excessively rare for it to happen in captivity, is even if somebody has an 18-foot reticulated python at their house, or maybe it's at a zoo, an aquarium, something like that, typically people have a little rule of thumb: don't get it out by yourself. Even if a second person is immensely helpful for removing a snake like that. Even if it's
just not responsible as
person.
one person.
It's just not responsible. I mean, even at the wildlife center with our male Burmese pythons, we have a rule: don't get it out unless there's somebody else within earshot, just so that they're able to grab that tail and unwrap it from that person, because odds are you're not going to be able to pull it off on your own. When it gets to be, especially when that snake starts hitting double digits, it gets a little
yeah.
crazy. At least our heavy-bodied ones. I would take my chances a lot more with a scrub python at 10 foot than a green anaconda at 10 foot.
Yeah, I've handled a 12-foot Burmese python before, and I can attest to like the size of that snake. Me being as big as I am and a relatively strong person, that was really laborsome. I mean, it was really hard to hold that snake by myself. And so trying to care for that animal totally by yourself, it just would be irresponsible on my end to be arrogant enough to say that I don't need any help with it. So I think you can definitely put yourself in a bad situation here in the United States, but even then, those cases they're not really happening. They're not happening in nearly a high enough volume to demand fear. But I mean, what we do see that happens is you have, even with all the information you've given, people are still really afraid of these large snakes. And you get these stories, and people that, one of my personal favorites, just love it, is I'm showing someone one of the snakes that I have, and they go, "Aren't you afraid that snake's gonna size you up, or something like that to try and eat you?" You hear that way more often than you would think for the absolutely zero evidence to support it. But it's kind of the idea of you've got a pet ball python and you're laying on the bed with it, and that ball python is going to stretch out beside you because it's trying to see if it's big enough to eat you. There's the whole idea behind sizing you up as a person. And there's a couple logical explanations behind your snake stretching out beside you that I think is kind of important. Is one is stigmataxis. Snakes like contact with their body, especially snakes like ball pythons that like to hide. So if you're laying out in your bed with a ball python, it's not going to be unheard of for that snake to stretch out across you and just kind of be butted up against you, because it's going to feel more secure up against you than it is going to just sitting out wide open like that, because they're an animal that is consumed by other animals in the wild. The other one is thermoregulation. You're warm. Your room is probably too cold for your pet constrictor if you have one. And so if your snake is just sitting out in your bed, it's probably going to want to be closer to its nearby heat source. The other explanation for that snake being stretched out beside you is just absolute coincidence. They're exploring. There's nothing to support your little pet snake trying to see if it can eat you. Now, there is support of having a food response to like your fingers, your hands, things like that. But that's misunderstanding. That's not your pet snake looking at you and be like, yeah, I can take you down. I can take you on. Like, or, I'm going to go for that. You've got a rapport with that animal, to the animal doesn't feel like it needs to be afraid of you, because you've desensitized it to your existence being there, and you smelled like food a little bit that one day, or you move just the right way and it bites onto you, having a prey or food response to you. But the whole idea of snakes sizing people up has come about as a part of this thought process that snakes are man eaters and you need to be afraid of those. And I just find that would be particularly ridiculous.
I know it got a lot of traction. I forget a lot of the details about it, but probably close to 10 years ago now, there was a story that went viral all over the internet, and I still hear about it probably once a week these days, about, like you said, a woman who had a pet python, let it out of its enclosure to roam around her room, and it quit eating. So she took it to the vet. Again, those who worked with large pythons, sometimes they don't want to eat for months, and then they go right back to eating like nothing was the problem. But she took it to the vet. Not saying that that's a bad thing to do, but the vet
great thing to do. Support that.
Yeah, but the vet asked her, supposedly asked her, does the snake like laying in bed alongside you? And she said, yeah. He goes, all right, you need to get rid of the snake, because what it's doing is trying to measure if it's long enough to swallow you yet and make itself hungry enough to do so. Okay, anybody who has kept any kind of snake, I don't care if it's a hognose ball python, reticulated python, or corn snake, okay, and has fed that snake, is it going to go slither up alongside that frozen thawed mouse and say, oh, let me see if I'm long enough
for sure
to swallow
this? Yeah, that's what they do with every meal.
They are bite first and ask questions later.
Bite it, wrap it up, start eating it. And I've even had to take food items away because I misjudged. Absolutely. I mean, it's been a while since I've done this, but I've misjudged the size, and they're like, oh yeah, you can't eat that. You're trying, but you can't eat that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, I love snakes. I think they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. I think the reticulated pythons are a big one that we really don't give enough credit to their intelligence, but even the smartest snake is not a very smart animal as far as in terms of logically and cognitive thought, not saying that they don't have all kinds of natural behaviors that show extreme intelligence, but they're not solving Rubik's cubes anytime soon.
Yeah, or at least complex instinct. That's what it is ultimately. It's complex instinct, complex natural behaviors that often happen when unobserved by people. So the thought process that these animals are going to have these complex, calculated behaviors while being observed by a person, it just doesn't align with anything else we see. It's just not logical in any way. And I hear this frequently, and I am not saying don't trust a vet, so please don't hear me. What I'm saying is don't trust your vet. The thing is, I hear people talk about how they took their pet to a cat or dog or a domestics vet, and they're asking them questions about their snake's behavior, their lizard's behavior, whatever it may be, and they're like, oh, my vet told me it's XYZ. And you may disagree with what that vet said. The thing is, these vets, especially domestics vets, they have to know so much about cats and dogs and the primary animals that they're working with, they're not spending all this time researching natural history of snakes. Like, they're not going to be spending the time that Luke and I will, or you as the listener, that you spend researching the natural behaviors, hopefully, of your pets that you have. And they may not know all of that. So if you're not giving them context, they're probably going to go with what makes sense to them. And sometimes what makes sense to them is something they've heard online or they've seen in the news that may not be true because they haven't had the chance to verify it. I'm not saying it's a total excuse for being wrong, especially if you've got your doctorates in veterinary medicine and you're doing this and practicing vet for a while. But it's understandable how they could not get that correct in every single circumstance. Like, there's going to be chances for them to be wrong. It's human nature to be incorrect about some things. So if you're seeing something like that that comes down to a natural behavior of an animal, a lot of times Google is your best friend. Do some research. Reach out to someone you can see online who appears to know more about snake natural behavior, things like that. And it's good to verify some of those things when you're having those discussions about that interesting behavior and stories like that. So I think we've painted a pretty clear picture here, Luke, of we see. Sorry, do you have something to say?
I just wanted to say, maybe we should have said at the beginning there, but better late than never, that when we're talking about painting this picture as well, this is not something that we have tried to joke about or bring light of these events.
Yeah,
these
for
are
sure.
things that we definitely want to treat with respect and not disrespect.
Yeah.
It's something that we want to bring up in a very respectful way and not something that we're not, taking seriously through this.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it is one of those families who have lost life of a loved one or whatever, we may be speculating about the exact details of the event and what may have taken place, but by no means are we trying to discredit the lives lost or saying that it's not a tragedy because of the details of what happened. So definitely not what we're trying to imply by any means. So hopefully that's not what you took away from any of this. But ultimately, I do think we've painted a pretty good picture of the stories and how this happened. So if you're listening to this video and you're watching this and you're trying to decide if you do need to be afraid of large snakes as a potential predator for you as a human being, I think we can both say together on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, no.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, probably not. You don't need to be afraid of this. Does that mean that you need to just be totally comfortable around snakes 100% of the time? I mean, I am the majority of the time. Luke, I would assume you are as well. But they're not everybody's cup of tea. We're trying to paint snakes in a positive light with this. But ultimately, it is you need to build up your comfort level. So what we don't want you to do is to be afraid for unnecessary reasons. If you don't really need to be afraid of snakes because you're worried about them eating you, you need to be respectful of large constrictors that do possess the power to injure you. You need to be respectful of snakes, like venomous snakes, things like that. But you don't need to live your life in fear of the events that are not likely to happen to you, especially living here in the United States. So we hope that was kind of the major takeaway from all of this. But the ultimate conclusion is that these things do happen. People are consumed by snakes. It's very niche, specific circumstances that lead to a person being consumed by a snake. So, I mean, ultimately, technically, man-eating snakes are real, and they do exist. And there's proof of this. It is not something that is a myth or a legend. It is a fact, and it is a proven fact that these things do exist. Just not very often. I mean, I think you're more likely to get struck by lightning multiple times in your life than you are to get eaten by a snake.
Spot.
So probably. So you're very, very unlikely to have it happen to you. It's possible, but highly improbable. So hope that was ultimately your takeaway from this video, and we hope that you did enjoy this video. Luke, do you have anything else you'd like to say about it before we close this part of it out?
I think we pretty much covered it.
I think we covered everything pretty good. So we thank you for joining us for our very first Legends episode. And like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy this video, please like this video, share it, follow us, whether it be on Spotify or subscribe if it's on YouTube, and turn that notification bell on. That way you're alerted whenever we publish anything new. Our next video will be another one of our Talk and Shop series, and we will be interviewing with John Rice of Fathom Hog. So if you're interested in hognose snakes and kind of some of his stories with herping and keeping and things like that, we do recommend you stick around and check that video out in a couple weeks. But other than that, we thank you guys for joining. We hope you have a great rest of your day, whether it be a morning, evening, or a night. Thank you guys.